Sarah. Miss Harcourt, on stage, please. Sarah.
This song was part of the colossal publicity campaign for a vast movie release in 1927. It was to become a movie that would symbolise change of direction for Australia's whole national cinema for 50 years to come.
Handed down straight to hell for the turn of his natural life.
So, Mr. Devine, you fat old sneak, you've tricked me for the last time. You don't trick Sarah again.
Do it again.
Oh, well, I was in Hollywood for years. I went to Hollywood in 1915, if you can bear it. I did, I loved it. And I went there and I used to do little itty-bitty parts, you know. There was always a moving director man at setting up the thing up, you know, play. A great director in Hollywood where I was Alan Dwan. Now this one decided to take a little powder himself with his name and come out here and become this famous director, which he decided to do. And he decided to do it, except that the direction wasn't what I'd call all that hot. Still, what does it matter? You get by.
Well, what I'm actually doing is reconstructing an early Australian silent film. This film existed only in a 60-minute form after the late 1940s. For some reason, the remaining approximately 60 minutes was lost. So that we got to the stage in the early 1950s where it was a very incomplete film. There was so little of it surviving, actually, that there were major gaps in the plot. The plot was already fairly complicated by the fact that there were alarming melodramatic coincidences. There were the leading hero and the leading villain were doubles of each other. In other words, whenever somebody took a look at this film, they were highly confused. So what we're doing with this film is combining the American release print version, which was rediscovered in America about a year ago, with the previously surviving Australian release print version. And this is where the interesting thing comes up. There are discrepancies between the Australian release print version and the American version.
There's something that really feels terribly right about this wonderful story that Norman Dawn got to Australia as some sort of ring-in or even an imposter. That the Australian Union company directors wanted to get a real Hollywood director to make international movies, and that they thought that they were getting a man called Alan Dwan, who was really quite successful at the time. But the documented facts really don't entirely bear the story out, and yet it feels exactly right. Because after all, Alan Dwan was just at that time nicely slipping off the top of a pretty good reputation. He was going to go on to other things, but nobody knew that. And when a man's slipping off the top, this does seem to be the time to invite a foreign director to Australia.
Well, there's no question about it that the term of his natural life was the most memorable milestone in the history of the Australian motion pictures. And of course, it was memorable not only because it cost a fearful lot of money in those days. We were making earlier silent films for round about £800 and less, but for this one we spent over £40,000, although I advertised it as £60,000, taking the license that one usually has in the motion picture industry. And it was the first time that we had brought out a director, chief cameraman, and 4 Hollywood stars. Norman Dawn, the director, had not done much in the way of theatrical feature films, but he'd got himself a very big reputation, an outstanding cameraman for his documentaries, which were most unusual and had made their mark.
Even supposing he arrived under his own steam to make a couple of shorts, which is the story, why on earth would a couple of big-time directors walk up to him with Australia's biggest and most expensive project by far and just offer it to him on a plate, practically as he got off the boat? And yet, Norman Dawn really did make for the term of his natural life into an absolutely unforgettable movie. What Norman Dawn made out of Marcus Clarke's chronicle of despair and degradation and blackness was, and still is, great soap opera, and I don't think there's any shame at all in that.
Presented by J.C. Williamson, for whom I was appearing at that time. And I didn't win, of course, because they said that I was in the final 6, but they said I was too English looking. And Beryl Mills won it, and she was much bigger.
One Australian, just one Australian, would be given the opportunity of stardom and screen immortality. A Miss Australia contestant and finalist, she was discovered from a musical theatre chorus line, and she'd be put before the cameras with all the atmosphere of Hollywood's razzmatazz.
Oh, it was exciting and daunting, but very thrilling. And Mr. Gortham came backstage and asked me if I would take screen tests for Sarah. And I said I should be very happy to do so. I dreamed of being a big star.
When I look at you, I know you're lovelier now than 50 years ago. And 50 years ago, you were beautiful.
1925, all our productions were shot at Rushcutters Bay. And then they took over the studio at Bondi Junction, where it was first mooted that the Term of His Natural Life was going to be a major production.
Well, that early on in the piece?
Yeah, in 1926. But I think it was about the middle of 1926 when Dawn came out and they began the production. And then Len Roos introduced this fast film, which is called Agrammatic.
This was the first time it had been used in Australia.
That's right. And we never had any ASA readings. That was all introduced some years afterwards. But back down in Australia, as you remember, we're so far away from America. We didn't know anything about reading film.
Nothing at all?
No, it was just guesswork most of the time.
So you just sort of flew it by the seat of your pants all the time?
Did we ever? So the only way we could control speed or control our exposure was by the speed of the camera or speed of the hand crank.
Well, what if you had a film like Term which, you know, had major action scenes which involved, say, sometimes 3 or 4 cameramen?
Well, we got away with it apparently because it's all matched up.
Come and have a look up here.
You're beautiful, so beautiful.
Oh, the kangaroo. That's funny. Well, it wasn't funny at the time. Well, I was seated up on this rostrum with antiques behind me. This is when I had become wealthy. And there was this darling kangaroo. I love animals. I dearly love animals. And I was dressed as Sarah in all my glory with a black wig and a beautiful dress. And the kangaroo was here. And Norman Dawn said to me, Sarah, hit the kangaroo over the nose, you know, just playfully, as though you're just playing with it. Well, this was fine, but after about 10 takes, the kangaroo got a bit sick of me and the lights, and we had about 200 extras down below us, and it just stood up on its tail and kicked me and the antique chair and my beautiful antique dress and my wig right off the rostrum. And anyhow, this was a bit of a shock. And Norman Dawn said to me, you all right, Sarah? I said, yes, Mr. Dawn, a bit shaken. He said, well, come on, we can't waste time, you know. Oh, but I was sorry for the kangaroo more than myself. Rex, dear, this is your wife, Sarah. Hush, you'll be free tonight, my darling. Well, for one thing, I was terribly, terribly nervous. But I was also very, very excited. I loved the role of Sarah. In fact, I lived Sarah. I was Sarah. Everyone called me Sarah. And I was much more Sarah than I was Jessica Harcourt. And it was all so full of glamour. It was completely glamour-filled and exciting. And I just loved being Sarah. I loved it. I was Sarah. And every night my wig was taken away and brought back in the morning, redressed and shined up. And my clothes were, I was helped to dress by my dresser. A voice used to come, Miss Harcourt, Sarah, on stage please. Just like that. And this was a sort of clarion call, you know? And down I would rush down those stairs. And then the lights and the cameras.
I was on the top of a hill somewhere near Dungog. And I don't know where the hell Dungog is now, you see, but that was where I was. And I was carted up onto this huge hill in a bucket. Here was this Abbo-looking fella who was going to rape me. And there was a period of rape going on. Lovely, I thought. Yeah, being seduced by an Aboriginal. And the next time I'd be riding into hounds with a very nice fellow. So I never knew what I was doing, really. They thrust me into things and I enjoyed it.
Andrea, who at that time was known as Dorothy Gordon, had had experience in Hollywood. She'd worked as a stunt girl for Cecil B. DeMille. She'd worked on scripts. She came back to Australia and she appeared in The Hills of Hate. Victor Longford was Raymond Longford's son, and they were both employed by Australasian Films to write a scenario. It's impressively written. They wrote this script until about a week or two after Norman Dawn was assigned to the project.
"53 years later, and this movie is still a media event.
I'm
carrying the tripod this time.
Turn slate 1, roll 1.
Well, at least the ABC has noticed it.
What's so important about the Term of His Natural Life that so much effort and money should be spent on restoring it?
Well, it was Australia's biggest production. It was the biggest production up until 1927. There'd been nearly 30 years of Australian silent film production. This was the film which was going to establish Australian film production for the world market. And it was an epic in every sense of the word.
Well, let's have a look at what you've got so far, and then you can explain in a practical way the problems you face.
We know that the first 2 versions of For the Term of His Natural Life don't survive today. Nobody bothered to hang on to them. The third one does, and that's terribly important for Australian cinema, for Australians as a nation. Fortunately, the print of Term that we received from America was in fairly good shape, although very fragile and very difficult to print. But if we hadn't got it quite in time, it would have looked like this. That's a nitrate film that's decomposed. And so the nitrate copies of Term that we now have, this is what they'll end up like in a few years' time.
Well, I want to show you something here.
Yes, I'm wanting to see it.
Well, here it is. Do you recall any of these pictures?
Stills and...
Do you recall who that is?
Oh, yes, I recall who that is.
Well, that's you.
Oh, yes.
Duncan Webb.
Duncan Webb and Katie Dawn.
Katie Dawn, that's right.
And up here is the glass shot itself.
That's right.
This sheet of glass...
Which is the glass shot?
That paint on the glass is the
yes.
actual glass shot.
Oh, that's the glass
that
shot.
was used in the film.
There's the frame. There's the glass set up with the camera behind it.
That was
Well,
used
that's it.
in...
And there's the result.
There's the end result. Once they've seen through the glass, that is the penitentiary with the building roof on it.
Isn't that marvellous?
And there's the penitentiary at the time without the roof.
Yes, that's right. And Norman Dawn brought it out to Australia for the first time. And it was one of the most remarkable shots in the film. And right there was the frame with the glass and the image painted on it. Back here was the camera. Over in the foreground there of the building were the convicts all lined up, and they marched straight in front of the building.
Oh, that's right.
And this was taken, gave the animation that was necessary to fit in with the glass shot. Right. And the roof fitted perfectly. And this shot was used in the film, and then later on Cine Sound used it for years.
Feeling that the reason that little-known Norman Dawn, given his one great moment, managed to become a sort of primitive of the cinema, a primitive of movies, so that we get involved not so much with the cardboard figures, but we get in among them, because what he's really caught is something close to an absolutely total ambience, in the way that a primitive painter, like, well, just for a simple example, Grandma Moses, sometimes involves us so deeply among her stick people when she catches the absolute total ambience of a village street or skating on a on a pond. If you're inclined to think that the terms insulated characters and their enclosed emotions were just the sort of thing that all silent movies were made of back then, well, think again, because this was 1926, and just for one quite small example at the time, there was the elegant silent version of Beau Geste with Ronald Colman being finished about the time that the term was being made. The jazz singer was going to change the whole world in only a few months' time. The photography is magnificent, partly because Dawn himself was a really fine cinematographer.
What's happening in here, Graham?
Well, this scene is where Dawes is actually set to grind pepper for 2 or 3 days, and he finally breaks down, and this is where he's pleading for mercy.
Mm-hmm. Who's the cameraman on the film?
Well, on this particular scene, it was Bill Therese, because Len Roos, who was the cameraman for most of the production, twisted his ankle. So Therese shot this interior scene and quite a number of other scenes.
Good Lord. I used to work with Billy 21 years ago. He was head cameraman at Commonwealth Film Unit.
Really?
Yes. Quite a character.
There were 3 principal cinematographers shooting the term. Bill Therese is one of Australia's film pioneers, and today he clearly remembers the term and its director, Norman Dawn.
He was very capable, as far as I knew. I knew him more as a cameraman technique of cinematographer, if you like to call it that now.
So where he impressed people locally was on the technical side?
Yes, well, you see, he employed a 3-string of instruments to play mood music for the actors. Things like that we never heard of here. We never went to that expense with actors to get them in the right mood. And he played music. The Prisoner's Song was one, music like that.
For every scene?
Oh, pretty well all the scenes, yes. It was very dramatic, I'll tell you. To work on a scene like you take the pepper mill, it was very sad to photograph that scene and have music going along in the background is quite impressive. Dawn did a miniature ceiling in scale and attached it near the camera. That was merged into the top of the walls of the set, around that edge.
Oh God, it's
never
hard
pick
to
it,
pick.
would you, huh? We did a few exteriors around Sydney. We did one scene on the Lane Cove River in the mangrove swamps. I think there were about 10 cameras used on that scene because there was a host of convicts employed, cameramen everywhere to be sure to catch the scene. A funny incident, they were all given a Hessian shelter on a stone jetty, a disused jetty, to change all these chaps. They were all out of work people. And while they were out on the scene, a strong southerly came up and blew all their clothes into the river. And forever, months later, they were getting claims for Stetson hats and high-class suits from all these people and caused quite a bit of confusion in the office. And this was an ambitious film being attempted by Australasian Films, and they got results. It cost a lot more money, of course, to produce this type of film. The actors got a lot more money than they would from local directors.
Do you think an Australian could have done just as well?
Oh, I don't think so, no. We didn't have the know-how in those days.
Well, Raymond Longford had made films like The Sentimental Bloke and On Our Selection. Longford suggested that they embark on a feature which could be exported to a wider world market. The subject he chose was For the Term of His Natural Life, in which Longford himself had appeared in an earlier Australian film version. He'd played Gabbett. So he suggested a fairly largely budgeted film, and the budget allocated by the executives of his employers was £15,000. They wanted to make films which they thought would be of guaranteed quality.
At that time we were building or rebuilding the old Hippodrome Theatre in Campbell Street into Australia's first atmospheric theatre. Doyle thought he would launch this theatre in the way that you'd launch a ship. So he got a bottle of champagne, strung it from the rafters, gave the bottle to Eva Novak, and we had an imitation foundation stone some distance in front of her. The managing director, Stuart Doyle, stood to one side, and at the given signal, she let go of the champagne bottle, missed the foundation stone, and nearly brained the managing director.
She was of Scandinavian descent. She looked absolutely beautiful, very blonde, and a beautiful lady, and a lady.
It was the first silent film ever made in Australia with amplified sound used by the director to direct mob scenes.
I knew Norman Dawn in Hollywood. We loathed him there because he was of a little type, you see. He didn't grow that way, he grew this way, you see.
And he was also used to working with a much earlier system where a director went out totally without a script, but just with a 1 or 2 page synopsis. So I think he probably worked with the Longford-Gordon script for a couple of days and then decided to abandon it, and he turned exclusively to the novel. I think he probably roughed out 1 or 2 pages of synopsis as a ready reckoner. He underlined key lines of dialogue which crop up in titles for the film. Entire pages of interior motivation are crossed out, which is something quite interesting. He just referred to this constantly, and in fact he built the film up from the novel.
Oh, well, he was here when I got thrust into the thing. I was his choice. And I was his choice not because he knew me. He only knew I knew Hollywood, you see. And I only knew him because I thought he was Alan Dwan. And he wasn't, of course, Norman Dawn. Ha ha. Funny.
Sure, we were cut off to an extent, but I'm sure they knew who Alan Dwan was.
He was, to himself, a great aristocrat of the films, you see, so we all had to crawl to him. And I didn't like crawling much.
It was a business relationship. Norman Dawn was a quick, quiet man, and I got on quite well with him. And but there was never any, what should I say, friendship. It was simply a business relationship. He'd say, Sarah, I want you to do this. Sarah, I want you to do that. And he didn't look at me, you know. And I'd say, yes, Mr. Dawn, yes. But I think if I had had a director with more motivation, I think I may have done better.
I don't think I ever spoke to him. He just did it through a passage of thought, you know, and came to me. His assistant came and said, Mr. Dawn wants you to do so-and-so and so-so. Well, I was so used to those little bits and bobs that I went and did them. Didn't hurt me in the least.
Dorothy Gordon went on location with them down to Port Arthur. There are memos of correspondence involving Dorothy Gordon in the Mitchell Library. Apparently, in the long run, they took a look at the film and they themselves were appalled at the results. They wanted their names taken off the credits.
We always called it the term, or the germ.
We didn't need a yank. Union Theatres decided to bring in an American director after Raymond Longford had done pre-production on the film.
Well, Ray Longford was a very bitter, embittered man. He had made The Sentimental Bloke, which was a success. He had made other silent films which were what we call bread and butter films. But when it came to embarking on a film of this unprecedented magnitude, the firm felt that they could not entrust it to anybody but somebody with an international and overseas experience. He was afterwards so bitter that he was the cause of the Films Commission, in which he accused the firm, Australasian Films and Union Theatres, of being completely American-dominated.
I mean, this was a tragedy for Raymond Longford. Longford had battled with the Combine, as it was known, for years and years and years, since 1914. He'd battled ferociously with them. They'd accused him of various things, he'd accused them of various things. And in the 1927 Royal Commission, which followed the production of Term, although it wasn't caused by it, but certainly it was mentioned a lot during the Royal Commission, this whole business of the friction between Longford and Union Theatres came out, and it came out like lava. I mean, Longford just poured out his spleen, and he poured it out with such ferocity that it was one of the aspects that contributed to the, ultimate snuffing out of his career.
That's what Australia does to its own people, you know. Very well known for that.
The effect on Longford was catastrophic. His career was virtually finissimo.
He was to produce the term before Norman Dawn arrived on the scene. A dreadful disappointment. He ended up his life as a night watchman on one of the wharves. He was a very talented director.
It's absolutely fascinating to see what a time capsule the term is. On one level, the film contains our own dark beginnings and then our continuing childhood when we're endlessly yearning across the seas for love and understanding. As the caption said in 1926, the love for his mother at home in England seemed to comfort Rufus. It was his one shining star. And even if somewhere between then and 1981, Mother has moved to Washington, D.C., there hasn't really been all that much change, has there? And then there's even a glance at the recognisably ambiguous future in the ending of the film itself. In the novel, Rufus and Sylvia die in the storm at sea, in the very moment when they're reunited. But in the film, in Dawn's film, they sail away into the unknown, shipwrecked, but safe just for the moment, but on a terribly shaky little craft.
Well, looking back, the one great disappointment that we had was that it failed to gain an international market. We brought American stars and directors and cameramen. We spent a fortune on it in the hope that we would break into the American and British market. But we failed, not because the film failed, but because the Warner Brothers, who were in a very bad way financially, launched The Jazz Singer.
That's right. Sound, of course, had just come in 1927, and it was only in one theatre. But in 1928, most of the theatres were fitted for sound. So Dawn had come over, and I heard that he was in New York, so I went up to see him. He was staying at the Manga Hotel. And he was sitting there in a chair, slumped in a chair, and he virtually was in tears. He said, "Here, I've got two good films. He had The Term of His Natural Life and The Adorable Outcast." And he said, "I can't sell a goddamn one." He said, "Sound has killed them." He said, "There's nothing to be done." He said, "We just can't do anything. They won't take them. They won't accept them."
Oh, how lovely. Now, I do want to tell you both a lovely little parody that went on about the song For the Term of His Natural Life, which the orchestra has just played, and you, Graham, thank you, have just sung. For the sake of a mother, he smothered his brother for the term of his natural life. Rather lovely, don't you?
Do you remember this, Jessica?
What's that?
Christmas is 1926.
Now, wait a minute. I want you to tell me who is who, if you don't mind, Graham, do you?
Well, there's you there.
And
You remember
there's
yourself?
me, yes, and the shadows.
There's Gabbett.
Here's Gabbett.
He's got his teeth in.
There you go, Gabbett, anyway.
Must have been angry. Must have been hungry.
And this is Marion.
That's Marion there, yes. Now, the rest of the lighting crew and the studio crew.
Bill, what's this over here, this rather interesting contraption?
That is the printing machine that the film was printed on.
The entire film was printed on this machine?
Duplex printer.
It's as clear as mud to me. Sorry.
I get that all the time.
And on the cinema level too, there is a beginning element with the film looking back to tell Australians what they were and what they could be too. And then there's an element of the continuing present where the film is betraying its true role because it is a stranger's film. And of course there was the element that said that this was the forerunner of the international films that may well be trying to stand in for an Australian cinema in this very day.
Don't know what he's saying, but I like it.